Welcome back to the Friendly Circle Berlin. My name is Patrick, and I'll be your host. Today's workshop is with Dr. Alan Berger. And many of you know Alan. He's been with us for close to 5 years now doing these workshops. And now he's been doing them the first Monday of every month. And this series is on the emotional sobriety, core value, and principle of each of the steps. And we're taking a deep dive into step 10. And today he's on part two of that deep dive. Alan, it's wonderful to see you. As always, I'm going to turn it over to you now. I believe I've co hosted you. You'll be able to share your screen and all that. So thanks again, Alan. Thanks for everything.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and I really appreciate you creating this space for us to have some amazing experiences here and share a lot of important information for people to, enrich and enhance their lives. So thank you for that. Okay, fantastic. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Well, before we really take a deep dive into step 10, let's talk about how we got here, okay? Because it's very important that you know we understand that the steps are each one stands for themselves, but they're also sequential, and what happens in one step moves us in the direction of the next step. You've heard me describe it before is that the first step starts by creating this charge, right? This charge of desperation that the way that I'm living my life is not working. I called that an existential crisis. The step one induces this existential crisis. And that crisis now prepares us for change. That crisis is so important. And we're now brought to a place where we're ready for something to happen in our life. And step two comes along and it starts to resolve that crisis. It says, look, there is hope, right? Have faith that something new is possible. And so we get a hold of that faith, but now that holding on to that faith creates another charge. Well, how do I do this thing, right? And then the next step comes along and gives us an answer to that. And then it creates its own charge, right? So it's this charge, resolution of this energy, this discharge, and then not another charge and discharge, all the way to now we're at step 10 and it's built up. So let's take a little bit of a journey through the steps just to look at how we got here. So the first thing we learn is that step one teaches us that change is paradoxical. You don't change by trying to become something you're not. When I tried to control my alcoholism, it was an utter failure. When I tried not to be emotionally dependent, I became more dependent. There's a weird thing that happens is that whatever we persist in or whatever we resist, we end up persisting in. It just seems to work that way. So we learn that the first step is this admission and acceptance of where we're at. Now, you've heard me talk about emotional sobriety is very interesting. The way that Ernie Larson said it, which really caught my attention, because he was talking about stage two recovery, he says, there's two first steps. He says the first step was the first step of desperation. We had to take a first step to save our lives. We were in trouble. We had an illness that was going to either lead to death, insanity, institution, right? It's going to devastate our life. It's going to create all kinds of problems, jail, that kinds of stuff. He says there's a second first step that needs to be taken when we do this work, what I would call of emotional sobriety. And that's the second first step is looking at how our emotional dependency has created an unmanageable life. Bill called it an impossible way of life because we put the cart before the horse, meaning that we expected life to be what we wanted for us to be okay instead of figuring out how to deal with life. This revealed that we were stuck in our development because that's what children do. They are very dependent on what happens in their environment to be okay. as we grow, and if we grow according to who we can be, we will learn to stand on our own 2 feet emotionally. But we're all stuck. None of us have learned how to do that. That's why I say that our problem, our real problem, and this is not to minimize anybody that suffers from a comorbidity, but our problem is not that we're sick, we are stuck. We suffer from a growth disorder. And Bill realized that. That's why he designed the steps the way he did to help us grow up. So, in this second first step, we become disenchanted, disillusioned with our emotional dependence. And it opens up the whole possibility of discovering something new. So, as we start to weaken the obstructive forces of our emotional dependency, the really constructive forces of our real self have a chance to grow. And if you think about what our real self, our real self is being alive and growing into who we can be, and becoming more and more differentiated and whole. That's God given to us. So as we're going through the steps, we realize that living consciously is a key to this recovery. And living consciously means being aware of self and others. I've really described emotional sobriety more recently as learning how to act for yourself without being selfish. I mean, really take that to heart for a minute. Acting for yourself without being selfish, acting for other people without losing yourself. That takes a high degree of consciousness to live that way. Now, when you're emotionally dependent, you have to have faith that there's another possibility because we don't see it yet. You know, if you've seen me do any presentation about Piaget's cognitive theory of development and the research he does with children, especially between the ages of 2 and 7, and what we call the pre-operational stage of cognitive development, you can see how much our current state of development influences our consciousness. At that stage, a child is only able to focus on one dimension of reality, and it is not the most important. So if I had 2 beakers that are the same size and have the same amount of juice in them, and next to them is an empty tall beaker, and I say to a child in this age range, do these glasses have the same amount of juice or are they different? The child's going to say they're the same. Then in front of the child, I take one of those glasses, pour it into the tall beaker, and I ask the same question. Do these 2 glasses now have the same amount of juice or are they different? The child will say the taller one has more juice because the child is using the height of the beaker to make that conclusion. That is not the most salient aspect or dimension of reality. The dimension of reality that's most relevant is the amount of juice in the glass, and that remains constant regardless of what kind of shape of a container that it's in. Child can't see that. You see, our development determines our perception. And so when we are stuck emotionally, we look at the world from an it's all about me point of view. That's where we're stuck in our development. So as we start to become aware that there's a new possibility, we start to see new possibilities. At this point in our steps, we're taking responsibility for how we create our existence. And how we produce our tension and distress is critical, as well as how we deal with it. And that's where step 3 comes along, and we're making a commitment to discover a new possibility. We're making a commitment, in my opinion, to grow ourselves up. The steps grow people. They're people growing steps. Step 4 comes along and we learn about developing an authentic relationship with another person. Step 4 and 5, by first getting a look at ourselves, getting honest with ourselves, and then sharing that with another human being. We're starting to learn about the value of an authentic relationship and how the truth will set you free, but only if you have the courage to live it and to share it. Step 6 and 7 come along, and they were brilliantly written to help us become aware of our resistance to letting go of some of these adaptations, what we call character defaults. We call them character defects, but we like to think of them as character defaults because they were a way that we have adapted to whatever situation we had to growing up and trying to ensure and our existence to whatever degree of possible. So we start to become aware of those things. And then in this step 6 and 7 is that what I call the pivot towards emotional sobriety. We make a commitment to developing the best possible attitude that we can develop towards ourselves, towards others, towards our relationships, towards our problems, and towards our relationship with our higher power as we understand it. We're also seeing the value of being able to ask for help. And that help comes along and says, all right, you got to clean up some of your unfinished business. Make a list of all the people you've harmed and start to deal with that and paying attention to what you can learn from the mistakes. This becomes essential to our growth and development. As you're going to hear me say later on, is there is no growth or development without making mistakes. Unfortunately, as we become adults, we get these ideas from our false self that I shouldn't make mistakes any. I should know better. I don't know where that comes from because it's a complete fallacy. You don't know better. If you knew better, you could do better. So we're all ignorant. And I think that that's the best diagnosis we can have for ourselves is I'm ignorant. I don't know these things. And so now being told that, look, if you want to live, have the best possible attitude towards life, is look at your mistakes and grow from them and take as much responsibility as you can to correct them. So that's where we're taking radical responsibility for how we've harmed others. As we're doing this, we're starting to develop something that is underdeveloped in us because of our growth disorder, and that's the ability to empathize with someone else. We can really start to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and understand the impact that our behavior has on who they are. You could see that when I say that, curiosity is so essential to a better life. This is the case where curiosity saved the cat rather than killed it, right? It didn't kill the cat, it saved the cat at this point in time. So we can see that not only are we doing things different to create a better life, but we're trying to understand what's going on and what has created how we have created our existence. So now step 10 comes along, and I want you to think of step 10 as integrating all that we've learned in the first 9 steps. We're taking all of the information, the practices we've developed, the perspective we've developed, and we're using that to live our life on a daily basis. This is very important because this is an integration. This step is learning, helping us learn what Bill called having a true partnership with another human being. It's essential in terms of a healthy relationship to be able to take responsibility for how we function in that relationship without blaming other people for our discontent or for our unhappiness or for what's going on. So recovery can't just be a good idea. We need to take action. We need to try on or experiment with new behavior and with new attitudes. And that's what this is about. And as we try on these things and we discover new possibilities, and that's the way I describe recovery now, is the discovery of new possibilities in our life. So I believe this step helps us maintain our relationship with our true spiritual self, our real self. It keeps our integrity. It guards against the return of false pride. Humility is the spiritual foundation of our spiritual life and the foundation of our emotional sobriety. This step is important in the restoration of trust in our relationships, especially with those people that we love and cherish that we've hurt and betrayed. And like I said, we're learning what a true partnership is all about. It's about me paying attention to what I'm doing and trying to bring the best of me to the relationship. So, if this is about integration, we need to look at what that means. What happens with integration and what makes it such an important part of our experience in growing up. So this is Dr. Dan Siegel, a UCLA neuroscientist. He's the author of a book called Mindsight. It's a brilliant book where he's really done a lot of work on understanding the brain and how it functions, and it's got some incredible insights into this. He's one of the people that's responsible for our now new understanding that we continue to grow and develop through our whole life. They used to think the brain was pretty much finished developing in our end of our adolescence, beginning with our young adulthood, and now the research is in that shows we continue to grow. And in fact, he's done research on people in psychotherapy. And what he's found is that psychotherapy, just like I think recovery, creates new pathways in the brain, new synaptic connections. So there is hope for us, right? So he says integration is the key mechanism beneath both the absence of illness and the presence of well-being. Absence of illness. One of the things when I was in graduate school, I was in a graduate seminar on personality, and we had to write a paper. And I wanted to write a paper on the fact of is there such a thing as an alcoholic or an addict personality? You know, now there is truth that the addict self shares certain commonalities with everybody else's addict. But what I was looking for was there a personality that kind of led us in that direction, right? That was kind of a precursor, right? Or created a vulnerability to becoming an addict. And after an extensive review of the literature, the conclusion was nope, no such thing. Extroverts become addicts, so do introverts. Type A personalities, type B personalities. People with high scale 4, low scale 4 on the MMPI. There was no personality pattern that predicted somebody becoming an alcoholic or an addict, except for one factor. You might be able to guess what it is. We fail to learn from our experience. We fail to learn from our experience. Wow. What do we say in the program? Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting, we say different results, but I think we really want them to be better. We want better results, but you're not going to have better results by just, hoping that they're going to get better. You have to look at what's going on. What was it that created the experience you were having? We have to learn. When we learn, we grow. When we fail to learn from our experience, we stay immature. We stay stuck. And we become very dependent on things around us being different rather than being different because we're stuck. We aren't different. We don't know how to be different because we're demanding things be our way. So he goes on to say that integration is the linkage, the connecting of differentiated elements of a system. It illuminates the direct pathway towards health, towards emotional sobriety. Well, what does that mean? Well, look at the following image. Your brain automatically connects all of these little black pieces into a gestalt. You see, we aren't passive in the way we perceive things. We organize things and we make sense of them based on our experiences up to this particular point in time and the meaning we give to that experience. So I hope you look at this and see this jet plane. We connect all of those white spaces and we fill them in. And so we see this figure as a whole. Your brain integrates information automatically. And it can do that partly so easily and so fluidly because we're not taking it personally. But if this was a situation that had more meaning to you, that integration of those dots may be more difficult. So Dan goes on to say this, when differentiation is blocked, integration cannot occur. Without the movement towards integration, the entire system moves away from complexity, which is what we do, right? We move from this state to a more complex state. That's what growth is about. From a current state to a more complex state, from a current state to a more holistic stage. That's what growth is about. That's what learning is about. He says, without the movement towards integration, the entire system can't move away from system moves away from complexity, away from harmony and flexibility, away from maturity, and into rigidity. So when we are stuck in our development, now our behavior becomes stereotyped. Now we have very little possibility to roll with the punches, very little possibility to find innovative ways of dealing with situations because we demand that the situations have to be the way we think they have to be for us to be okay. That's what our stuckness does. It creates a very rigid system that makes it impossible to learn and grow and develop. Because if I'm sitting there and objecting to reality all the time, I'm not paying attention to what I need to grow myself to be able to better deal with what's happening. If I'm offended by reality, I'm not going to get down and really dig into what's going on with me and how come I'm so reactive to what I've just experienced. He says you can fall out of the other side bed too. When you just look at, let's say, if all those black pieces and you don't connect them, he says you move away from complexity, and this move is towards chaos. Now you've got all this information, you don't know how to put it together, and you're just overwhelmed. So when we fall out of one side of the bed or the other, and as Bill said, emotional sobriety is about real maturity and balance, right? We need to have balance in our lives so that we can integrate the information we're learning. So the first thing we need to integrate is that trouble in a relationship doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. You're always going to have trouble in a relationship. You're going to get upset. You're going to be disturbed. Things are not going to go your way. You're going to find your feelings hurt at some time. You're going to be upset. You're going to be discontent. You're not going to be like what's going on. All of that, all of that is an opportunity if you look at it the right way. And the way Bill suggests to look at it is he says it's a spiritual axiom that every time we are upset, no matter the cause, there is something off with us. He says wrong with us. I like to change it to off. I don't like the shaming of that wrong. There's something off with us. What's off with us? He tells us in that letter, if we look at every disturbance we have, whether it's a big deal or not, we're going to find at the root of it some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demands. That's what's going on. And if you understand that's the usual suspect, you don't have to search too far to figure out what's going on with you if you're upset. It's right before your very eyes. So trouble in a relationship means something is right. Relationships grow us. They're people growers, just like the program is. And they grow us is because we're trying to put together two people in a relationship and figure out what's going on and how our needs get met, how they don't get met. All of that is important information for me to learn how I'm dealing with that situation or with that reality. This is Dr. Nathaniel Brandon, and he writes a lot about self-esteem. He goes, no one can always give us what we want. No one can always respond to us in the way we would like and just at the moment we like. No one else exists for the satisfaction of our desires. Boy, that's a piece of reality to really wrap your head around, right? You think if you get married with someone that they exist to satisfy your desires. And if we attempt to manipulate someone into this role, right, to meet our needs, either by playing for their sympathy or by playing for their guilt, all we succeed in doing in the end is to stimulate resentment, regardless of whether or not our partner is maneuvered into complying with our immediate request. He goes on to say, and this is what we're striving for with emotional sobriety, is to be autonomous. He says, autonomous individuals understand that other individuals do not exist merely to satisfy their needs. They accepted the fact that no matter how much love and caring exists between people, we are each of us, in the ultimate sense, responsible for ourselves. Wow. That was news to me. So step 9 helped us regain our integrity and trust, right? By going back and making amends. We learned how to honor and genuinely respect the dignity and emotions of another human being. We're growing up. This much is clear if we have come this far. And step 10 ensures that we will continue to be humble and to take responsibility for when we are wrong. If you don't do that, then as Harry Tiebout says, the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. We can slip back, and that dumb and raging hidden Mr. Hyde can take over pretty fast. He says, with a persistent effort to practice this important step, we increase our self-esteem, we become more trustworthy, and we lay another brick in the foundation for our emotional sobriety. As I said, Bill said this about step 10. It is a spiritual axiom that every time we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us. This is what we've learned in the first 9 steps: to practice self-examination, to take responsibility, and to own our behavior. Bill says a spot check inventory taken in the midst of such an emotional disturbance can be very great help in quieting stormy emotions. You see, this is where we say it's so important to pause when you're upset. The only way the best in you can do the talking for the rest of you is to enter the pause between the stimulus and our response. If not, you listen to what we call your first voice. Your first voice is likely to be the dumb and raging Mr. Hyde, making demands. You know, Tom Rutledge and I encourage you to listen to your second voice. This quick inventory is aimed at our daily ups and downs, especially those where people or new events throw us off balance and tempt us to make mistakes. Throwing us off balance. Well, it reminds me of the concept of an emotional center of gravity. You see, when your emotional center of gravity is well placed over your 2 feet, just like your physical center of gravity, you have a pretty strong foundation. You're grounded, and it's going to take a lot to knock you off balance. But as soon as you take your emotional center of gravity and give it to somebody else, it's very easy for you to lose balance, because now the other person is holding your sense of self, your idea of yourself, your self-concept, your self-esteem. It becomes an other validated self-esteem. And if they're not validating you, you're off balance. So what this tells us is pay attention, because once again, of course we're going to, experience this in our relationships. That doesn't mean something's wrong with your recovery. It means something is needed for your growth. Remember, growth is the integration of learning from our mistakes. The only mistake we can make is not learning from our mistakes. In all these situations, Bill says we need self-restraint, an honest analysis of what is involved, meaning what's going on with me, right? What is my unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand? A willingness to admit when the fault is ours, and an equal willingness to forgive when the fault is elsewhere. We need not be discouraged when we fall into the error of our old ways, when the dumb and raging hidden Mr. Hyde shows up, for these disciplines are not easy. We shall look for progress, not perfection. Wow. Brilliant.